Hello, everyone. I'm Traci Arieli, end of life doula and founder of Comfort Enclosure. Today, we're going to talk about a truly unique option that combines sound and memorialization. We're joined by Jason Leach from Vinyly, a service that transforms a person's cremains into vinyl records. This episode is about exploring the blend of legacy, memory, and sound. Join us as we discuss how preserving personal messages can keep our loved ones' memories alive in a way that you can literally hear and feel.
My name's Jason. I grew up hearing a story about my great-grandfather's ashes being scattered at sea, and the wind blew and they ended up having to sweep him off the deck. And then when my grandfather died, we went out into the Solent and my uncle scattered the ashes over the side and the wind blew again and I actually got an eyeful. That won't be happening with me because I press human ashes after they've been cremated into vinyl records.
Jason, welcome to the show and thank you so much for being here.
My pleasure.
Could you start by telling us a bit about Vinyly?
Well, yes, you described it well. Essentially, we're making audio-visual memorials and putting ashes into real vinyl records. They are real vinyl records. They're not sort of copies of them. They're real vinyl records made in the traditional way. We just break the process at certain stages and obviously add our extra elements there. It started back in about 2006 with an idea for myself, really, with my mother was working unexpectedly in a funeral director's. And she kept badgering me saying, we get lots of young men through at your age coming through here. You know, you need to make sure you've got your affairs in order. What do you want to do? She's saying there's nothing worse than not having everything sorted out for everybody that's left. So she started me thinking, which I'd really not done before, and terribly. I was getting on a bit by then. I was in my 40s, even early 40s. Still hadn't really spent much time considering it, thinking, oh, it's way off yet. I thought, well, I've been making records for over 25 years with music, my own music, and I thought, well, I'd like to leave a record of myself, in a true sense of the word. So I started exploring the idea, really as an exercise, really just to force myself to think about it, because I found that I didn't want to. It was something I was naturally resisting, and that's why I hadn't really considered it. Obviously, we all know we're going to die, but I'd not really confronted it properly. And I sort of used getting this together as a sort of a vehicle to do so. And at the same time, I sort of started putting the concept together on a website, and it just got huge interest straight away. And I'd never intended to be offering it as a service for anybody, but demand basically ultimately persuaded me. And after 6 months, a year of people seriously saying they wanted to do it, I started to do it. We've never really taken it up on a large scale. It's just myself and Harriet, my living partner, and my partner in the business. She's a graphic designer. So we keep it fairly small, and we've made a point of doing that so we can put all our effort into it, because it's something that's particularly special and important for people. And we'd like to make sure we give everybody equal service, as it were. And so, yes, kind of grown from there, really, as being forced into doing it.
I love how you mentioned that, this was really the first time that you really considered death. And because no one does, it's just not part of our society. And so to confront that is really interesting. So you're in your 40s with people who are coming to you now. Or do you find that some of them are similar, that they're around our age also in the 40s and 50s, or?
It's just what varies wildly, because more often than not, although the idea was originally a sort of concept for arranging and planning it for yourself or myself, we do many of those, but the vast majority of them are people who are doing it with the ashes of a loved one or wife or husband or son or daughter. Um, and so we've got a very wide range. I mean, the only one thing that I would say that stands out is almost, I would say more than 90% of the people we deal with, which might be the person arranging it for someone else, are women.
Mm,
It's quite rare that it's a man that we're
wow.
organising it with. I don't know what that means, but it kind of feels obvious, really. I think
Yeah.
maybe women are a bit more realistic and brave and want to get things organised rather than putting them off. It
Yeah.
may be men not wanting to generalise, but perhaps tend to do that a bit more.
We could generalize. I find that also when I work with people on planning, advanced directives, it's the woman is always the wife or the spouse or is
Yeah,
always the person who is comfortable with doing this. And it's mostly, I'm not going to say always, but mostly the husband or the man in the relationship who is really like, oh, I really don't want to talk about this. Um,
yeah. Well, that's what I found. I mean, saying at the beginning when I was exploring it, I started trying to speak. I started asking my peers questions because I was beginning to think about it myself, and it was shocking the reaction I got. I mean, I even got people being angry. They didn't want to talk about it. It's like, why you want to talk about that now? It's like, well, I don't know really. I don't really want to, but it's just interesting that no one actually wants to, and you're even getting annoyed with me for bringing it up. So yeah, I found that quite interesting, and yeah, probably more often than not, it was men who were reacting more like that.
yeah.
Not always, but more often than not.
Yeah. I totally understand when people don't want to talk about it and they're like, "Would you just stop? Stop
Yeah,
talking." But it really becomes this is our, this is a business that you're you have to be passionate about. It's not something that you're doing just to make money. Yeah, money, you have to live, but
no, it
it's
was never intended to do it. I mean,
yeah.
it isn't. There's been plenty of opportunities to sort of make it much bigger, and we're not interested in doing that. We do other work as well. It's something that we've said we're not going to do unless we can do it 100%, properly,
Yeah.
and ourselves. We don't want other people dealing on our behalf with customers, or trying to offer because they don't know what we can and can't do, and it starts to take your, like you say, your passion away from it, and then the amount of care you put into it as things become bigger.
Can you walk us through the process of how you receive the cremains through actually transforming this into a record?
Yeah. Well, yeah. What we do first is we organize the artwork for because we have. I'll just show. Hopefully, I can do a good job of showing you this because I know sometimes it doesn't work. But you get a record sleeve, of course, which is what the record comes in. You can do this. This is actually a friend of mine's record, and this is just quite often is used different variations of collages of lots of different pictures at different times. So that's one area where you've got a visual aspect, and even along the spine, you can have things done. And then you've also got, you can have a paper inner, which you'd normally expect and you'd be used to seeing with records, but you can also have printed inners. This is an example of one where lots of people had written notes.
Mm.
I think it was for the funeral service, but then they were sort of collaged and put together to make the inner sleeve. And then you've got actually on the record, I've actually got a blank one here. You've got this area in the center here, which is blank. There's nothing printed on that. This is actually an example of the sort of most basic thing that record you could make with no printed sleeve and no printed labels and one side of audio. But that's another area on both sides of the record that you can have printed um, imagery or writing. You can see on that one there. But anything could be printed on there. Uh, as I say, often people go for collages, but other times this was actually for dog. But there's paintings. It's just any image or anything you want visually can be put onto the sleeves, and the sleeves and labels are the first part we need to work on. So we send templates out for both of those. And Harriet, as I say, is a graphic designer who's been designing my labels and sleeves since the early 1990s. So she's very practiced at it. And it was her profession anyway. That's why she did my labels and sleeves, because she was already a graphic designer. And so they're the first things, because obviously when you've made the records, they need the labels are actually made during the process of put on the record while it's pressed, and they need to go into the sleeves they're going to be protected in. So we need to get that done first. So we do the artwork first. Once we've got that underway and we're printing that, we'll then work with the audio content. And, as they're compiling it, sometimes it will be songs, sometimes it will be audio that families want to take off of, video clips, films they've made on their phone, or it might be answer phone messages perhaps, or their voicemail message, or messages that members of the family have been left by the person that's deceased. So there's all different things. And sometimes people haven't thought of using content like that, and they actually very much improve an Vinyly record, because they'll mean more to the family now and potentially off in the future in generations' time. Whereas perhaps, some crazy punk tune they might have enjoyed, but perhaps the rest of the family were driven berserk by it. So, it's not always the best idea, although it's the first thing people think of. There's lots of different ways we've now got captured audio from people. So we help and speak to them and suggest and help them along the way of different things they can consider. Often they know exactly what they want and they don't want those. And very often they're really thankful for that. And then they maybe enroll more help from sort of friends and family who can also sort of send in images and photos and memories and share memories that maybe they've had with them and the family didn't know about. And then it can make the process go on quite a lot longer. But almost every customer says that was one of the best parts of it, because they can kind of get together and use that as an excuse every week or 2 weeks to get together, whether it's digitally like this or literally get together and share content and help sort of compile a perfect record. Because obviously the thing about a real vinyl record is that they're normally made in their thousands or tens or hundreds of thousands, millions even, if you're Taylor Swift or someone like that. But we might be making 1 or 10. And the price difference between the two is very small, because all the cost is in making your pressing plates and your origination of your artwork, preparing the audio, etc., to make these pressing plates. So once that's done, it's very worthwhile considering, well, who else maybe would appreciate one of these? There might be some close friends who they spent a lot of time with in the last however many years, sometimes more than their actual close family. They may have spent more time with them, and we find often they might have maybe been overlooked when this was originally being organized, but then they've been involved and included, and the family have loved it because they've got to know a lot more about what their loved one had been doing. So we found that's a sort of process that happens. Once we've got the audio compiled, and it's about 18 minutes per side of a 12-inch vinyl, and as many separate audio tracks as you want. I mean, if you can fit 40 or 50 answer phone messages, for example, that's the same price within the 18 minutes if you have one long piece of audio. It can be a bit longer if the audio isn't strong beats, for example, and it's more spoken word or ambient sounds. We can maybe get a bit longer. But if it's particularly loud, it might be suggested it goes a bit shorter. But we work with them on that and help to arrange it and compile it. And what we'll do is take all of their tracks once they've decided the order, make sure they're all about the same level, help with any trimming of the beginning of the end, or even lifting the audio off of videos. Perhaps they might not be able to do that, so we can help with that. And then when they're happy with the audio on each side, then we master the audio, make dub plates, which is where you kind of what is called cutting it. So and a plate is made for each side, and they're actually very much like vinyl records, but a bit bigger. And then these are used to then make the negative, which is the pressing plate. So through electrolysis, they then make metal, which is like the opposite of a record, if you like, because instead of the grooves, you've got a mountain range, a spiral mountain range sticking up, which when it presses into the vinyl creates the groove that the needle sits in. So then we make all of that. And then while that's being made, we then contact the family and arrange for them to ship the ashes, which is a very small amount. We ask for about a teaspoon per vinyl. So it's not very much. So often people say, "Oh, great! So my mum can still keep the urn, or they can still scatter some, or whatever." There's still those options because we don't use it all by any stretch. We use very small amounts.
Do the cremains affect the sound at all?
Well, we have to sort of say they might, because when we normally make a record, we do everything to avoid getting anything like dust close to the process. However, we're purposely putting it in, but we have developed like standard operating procedures to get it in the vinyl and not on the vinyl. So not so much that you notice, but there will be possibly a few more pops and crackles than you might normally get. But that's there also. So not so that you can't play it.
That's part of the charm. I mean, when you think of
Yeah, of
of
course, yeah.
listening to an LP, it is.
Yeah, of course, yeah. As long as it's not too much.
Yeah.
I mean, some we did have one, and wasn't one of our ideas, and it's often the case, and we then share them with the future customers. But they said they actually cut a track of a minute and a half of nothing, of silence, so
Mm.
that in between people had this time just to reflect and maybe think of the person. Um, but it was quite interesting, and we were almost laughing a bit because what silence are we going to use? Are you going to record silence and send it to me, or shall we record the silence? And is it silent? So it can get you can start thinking, oof, well, that's interesting. But yeah, basically, but a track of silence, just so a pause and a moment of thinking, is quite a nice idea. So they're the sorts of things we pass on. Also, with the artwork, for example, someone else had the idea. They sort of put a fake barcode on the bottom and put dates, important dates,
Mm.
and birth dates and things like that on there. So there's all been all sorts of great ideas that customers have come up with that we always, when we're making, when we speak with customers, just let them know what sort of ways they can think. They'll always tend to come up with an idea themselves as well.
Yeah, the process of creating that art, because that's exactly what you're asking people to do, is to create
Yeah,
artwork that's so soothing, and it really, there's been studies that show how that helps grief, and that how it helps internalize it, and
yeah,
helps heal. So I'm sure
yeah, and
that's.
yeah, and also it's a way of, because again, it's a very difficult time sort of straight afterwards. And, often it's quite a good focal point of a way to think about these things and organize the pictures and maybe see others from brothers, sisters, other people you haven't seen. So that's something that we've just heard as feedback from people, that they found that very useful.
Yeah, that's beautiful. It's the process that's as important as the actual record you receive.
Absolutely. Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And also even the sort of limitations, or in a way, of the sleeve and the labels, and then maybe the amount of time you've got. How do you choose those, and what do you what's the best way of sort of summarizing it? And there's almost a sort of freedom through the restriction of those limitations as well,
Yeah.
to sort of summarize what's best and think about, is it for me? Is this something that they would like, or is it something that we'd like the whole family and friends and future generations? Where's it aimed? It's all of those things are good things to think about,
Yeah.
and they're still about the person. So I think that's why it works.
So I'm assuming they're permanent. Where do the plates go? And the reason why I ask this is, a year from now, let's say I receive a
Yeah,
record from you, and a year from now, I'm like, oh, I need to get five more. Is that a
yeah. Well,
possibility?
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we keep them. We wouldn't not there comes a limit, because you can't keep everything forever.
Yeah.
But we certainly keep them, and also customers have an option where they can, if they want, they can buy them. We can send them to them, but you've got to make sure you look after them for them to still work. So it's almost better for us to keep them where they're kept in a situation where they're supposed to be kept than sort of shipping them back and forth. And we'd have to check they still worked. Then, if you don't know what's happened, you can't resist looking at them. They look great then, but these big circles of metal. So yeah, we did. But yes, that is, of course, that is another option. Absolutely.
When I work with families, we always talk about how we want to maintain a connection with a loved one. That's part of the grieving process and part of connecting with your loved one again. How do you think that your product changes our relationship with death and the way we remember our loved ones?
I'm not sure it changes anything. I just think it's maybe a good. It's just a good method. I mean, it's what it says. It's a record, if you like, of someone. And the thing I find, the thing that I really liked the idea of when I first had the idea, um, back all those years ago, was that I would have loved to have had a record of my great 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 granddad who lived in the mountains in Switzerland. Not that he would have had a record player then, probably, but you know what I mean. The thought of having a relative or knowing your voice can move the air in the future, a few hundred years down the future, someone can put a record on, and my voice could move the air in the room and move them a little. That I think is quite amazing. So that was one of the sort of the romantic ideas of it, I thought, and I think if you make one of those, possibly that would be what's very special about it. And the fact it's a vinyl and it is a vibration of the needle in the groove. It's a physical thing. It's not a digital file. It is literally sort of, if you're not mechanical, but it's a physical process that's going on there. And there's a spinning thing. There's all sorts of angles here which kind of make it um, feel right to me. And I think maybe they're the sort of things, if people like that, that may be something that would be helpful or they would like. And I can understand maybe at first people, when they get their record, maybe at first find it hard to listen to, but it will be one of those things that it's there and you can, and probably as time goes on, you probably can enjoy it more and more.
Yeah.
But yeah, I would have thought it's a good way of encapsulating all of those things.
Yeah, I it's funny that you talk about wanting to listen to your great-great-grandfather or, pass along your voice. We, had a family that they actually brought out this quarter-inch tape, those really old, it was like
Yeah, yeah,
70 years old, and my husband has a 50-year-old reel-to-reel player, and it was of this man's bar mitzvah, and so you hear him as a child,
yeah,
but you also
yeah.
hear his parents, and he's in his
Hey,
80s now,
yeah,
so he hadn't heard his parents for a long time.
yeah.
Um,
Hugely evocative, things like that. I mean, whether you were there if you were somewhere, hearing a recording of a time is almost more than seeing a video of it. There's something about it. I've always known that from making my music for years. One of my favorite parts of the process was actually going out and getting field recordings. And when you get back and go through the things, and especially when I listen to these old DATs and recordings I made in the 90s, it's incredible how it was just a random day of many when I went and did it, but I can just tell the sound of the bus going by or someone saying something as we walk past, and you can just remit, it takes you back there. Um, and that's kind of where the idea originally came from my point of view, with the sonic thing, because I find it probably similar to smells, I would say, with a lot of people as well. It's very evocative of specific times and places. And music does it too, but I think it's more about recorded sound. It doesn't really need to be music. Music, I think, uses that, but it's not what music's all about. I think that music kind of borrows that thing, which does happen with, if you can hear recordings from certain times. So yeah, that's what's great about it.
yeah, it's almost magic. I mean, it really
if
How
you like that sort of thing and or relate to it, then it can feel like that for sure. I would say, yeah.
in our country, we don't do death and grieving well, and I'm assuming where you're at also in your country also. Um,
Yeah, it's the same.
how does that how does that attitude towards death and grieving impact what you do?
Well, I think it's got so much better from when I first started with Vinyly in 2006 and was, you know, putting the website up and getting that interest. There was also a lot of interest from radio stations and places and people who didn't like it and who, you know, and it was very much, it wasn't really spoken about. There weren't as many, there's all sorts of options. You can now do everything with ashes from tattoos and, you know, all sorts of things. I think at the time, I'm, I think I'd heard about Hunter S. Thompson who put his ashes in fireworks, but it wasn't something you could go and do. I think he had it done. And there may have been people, you know, the possibility of making a diamond
Yeah.
or something, you know, but there was none of the rest existed. So there's definitely been more conversation, which is good. And I'd say it'd be the same in America here. I know there's all been all sorts of sort of middlemen companies that have been wanting to put us on their site, but they're not actually sort of part of the thing. They're just recognizing it's something a lot of people are doing and talking about. So I think that the conversation's definitely in it's getting bigger and it's better. That's better for it. But it's still. I mean, I was literally shielded from death when I was young, whereas my grandparents in the village, it was something that happened regularly because everybody kind of knew each other. So if there was any death anywhere in anyone's family, they would all be there, and it was something that people spent time on, and you know, it was part of everything. Whereas I was literally when my grandparents died, I don't think I was told for a week because they didn't want to upset me because I don't know, I was doing exams or something. I don't know what it was, but you know, it was more like we're shielded from it rather than in the past it was very much in your face. It's to use the expression, but you know, it was you all accepted it and it was understood and considered and everyone was aware of it. So that I think's been something that it looks like we're going the right way again now. Not very fast, but we are, I think, because people talk about it a bit more than they did. But certainly when I was growing up, it was no one talked about it. You
We
know, like I say, didn't want to.
over here also we've taken away that knowledge
Yeah,
because back we really had it really turned or it really changed during the Civil War for us, the 1860s, because people wanted before people when they passed away, they were on the farm, they were even in the city. People they kept the body there. The person died at home, and everyone was around it, but around their loved one. But with the Civil War. People wanted their person back. People wanted their son back. So embalming became the norm at that time. So, and of course, that takes the body away from the home setting and gives the body to someone else to take care of. So that was
yeah,
where it really changed, at least in our country. And so we have the same thing. We are afraid almost.
yeah, exactly. Well, certainly what I felt about it when I was trying to make myself think about it, I just didn't. I was automatically not letting myself. I didn't want to. I didn't like it, and it will have been fear, but mainly from the unknown. And it wasn't so much about knowing what happens afterwards, if anything. It's more about just not being exposed to it or ever being talked to about it. It was like something that I had no experience talking about or even experiencing it really. Which in some ways you could say it's because we've grown up luckily in areas and at a time where we're not surrounded by it all the time. But like you say, it's often if something does happen, it's away from you, isn't it? And it's hidden, whether it's in a hospital or then it's all taken away and not in front of you. So yeah, that's definitely what must have caused it, I would say.
When did you start? Because you talked about the 1990s.
Well, 2006 is when I first sort of I'd sort of I'd had the main idea and I had a website, but it wasn't something I was offering as a service at the time, like I say. But that's when it was first existed as the concept and I'd worked out how to do it, and it's what I was doing for myself. Um, so since 2006, and then probably the first year or two, a lot of people heard about it because of the website and the interest the media um, had in it. And that was all over the world, radio stations, TV shows, people wanted to do documentaries and all sorts. So there were quite a lot of people heard about it then, but it didn't really, we weren't making them regularly until 2 or 3 years later. And then it's been slow, and like I say, we've made a point of not we don't want it to be too we don't want it to become out of something that we can do larger than something that we can do, so we've always been a little bit careful with it, but yeah, it's been growing slowly um since then.
You mentioned that the media was worldwide, so you had all different countries. Have you noticed a difference in attitude towards this process, or with working with people, um, depending on what region or where they live?
Well, yeah, I think there is, but I think the thing is the people who contact us want to do it, so they've all got something in common straight away. um but but certainly, there are some countries that it wouldn't be something they could consider because of their, what they believe. Um, but yeah, not really a huge difference myself in that. I mean, I did notice at the beginning, and then I had to learn to be careful with it. Sometimes certain radio shows that where I was asked to be interviewed, I was naive and just was like, yeah. And sometimes you'd be getting barraged with people who didn't like it and were telling me off basically. So, that wasn't very nice. But it was all learning. And so, yeah, some places, certain, religions, they're probably not, wouldn't like the idea very much. But that's no different with doing a vinyl or making jewelry, for example, or whatever. So it's all that sort of same area, I guess. But yeah, so obviously there are places that are different, but ultimately the people we speak to, either it's them themselves or their loved one, who said they wanted it or love it. So they tend to be sort of similar, I would say. Well, they have that in common at least.
What are some of the biggest challenges that you have encountered in developing and offering this service?
Well, the biggest was really almost being forced into doing it because how many people wanted to, and then thinking, I'm not trained to do this. I've got to speak to people who are, families who are mourning, etc. So I was nervous about doing that correctly, but so far today, says only nice, positive feedback. So I'm obviously, that was something that was the biggest concern because it's something you've got to be very respectful and careful about. So I wasn't sure if I'd be any good at that, but it seems to feel sort of fairly natural. So that's I'm pleased to say that's fine. Apart from that, obviously things like, to literally the sort of actual process of physically getting the ashes in the record. Obviously, I've sort of developed that with other types of ashes. Um, and spent a while doing that, but it wasn't anything too major, but it took a while to get that right, so it goes in there and not onto the vinyl. But apart from that, because I've been making records, it's been a sort of love of mine and what I wanted to do from when I was very young, and then I ended up doing it. And Harriet's graphic designer, we're kind of ideal for it because it's both of our fields of expertise, and we're the sort of unit that deliver the whole thing. So we've got all those angles covered. So really, yeah, it's just the fact that you have to dealing with people in a time when they're potentially, fragile, and you need to give people time and space. sometimes people get these done really quickly, and we can make them quicker than most places that can make records in the world. Um, but sometimes people take 18 months, 2 years to do them. Sometimes because they've started and then they needed a bit of time. Other times because they are actually enrolling more family members and friends and starting to think, crikey, we've got, they're completely changing what they want on it and how they want it to look as they're going. Um, and yeah, it's just a case of reading those situations correctly. You have to keep in touch, make sure they know that we're still here when they're ready, um, but without sort of pushing them, because once we've got all the primary raw materials we need, we don't, the price won't change, and they can take as long as they need, or make it as quickly as they want.
I know that for me, being in this industry, it's really changed my view on death and life, how I live my life. You're working with people, you're working with clients that, as you said, it's a very difficult time, and so you experience that with them.
Yeah.
How has that affected how you view life?
I would say definitely. I mean, I think me just when I was sort of coming up with a concept, that's when it really did it, because I started really thinking about how what do I want to leave on this thing for people to remember me. And as soon as you start giving that any serious thought, it makes you realize where you're wasting time, what what don't you want to be remembered for? You definitely starts changing what you do day to day. So it's actually, accepting that you're going to die and going through that process actually makes your life loads better. It's not something that you should be frightened of or not think about. Obviously, the process with people left is always difficult, but if you're thinking about this for yourself, it changed. So that was something that I think happened there and then when I was really working on that. And it also, I've also, I think, because over the since I first started doing this, the two main guys that I made music with different things, they both passed away. So I'm very aware of what it feels like. And it's sort of that's been something that happened right early on, and again sort of since. So I think it's been something that yeah, I don't it's not like it's a negative thing speaking to people going through that. I recognize the importance of it, and having experienced it obviously myself as well. But I think what it does is it's hugely positive actually, because when we get the feedback from people and they just say how fantastic it is and how much they love it, or some would have loved it, and we get contacted by friends who might not have been even invited to the funeral service, for example, because their family didn't know them, not for any um, bad reason, just because they didn't know they were friends, but they get a record, and the sort of feedback we get is amazing. So
Mm.
that feels great, and that's why really we sort of do it, because it feels like it's something that's people are really appreciating. So that's good. So it's positive overall.
You mentioned before how when your grandparents died, you didn't really hear about it because you were sheltered.
Yeah,
In your home now, since you do this, I know you have a child or maybe more than one child, and I hope
yeah,
it's okay to ask this.
yeah,
Um,
cool. Yeah.
how is that conversation? Is it how you talk about this? Is that different than when you grew up?
Well, yeah, I think it's been good because for them now they've grown up during the time this is and Vinyly's existed. So they're they this is never they're not gonna get to 40 and be thinking about it for the first time. They're they're made fully aware of it all the time, because they know that what we're working on. And often when we're packing them or whatever, sometimes the younger one will help us do certain parts of it. So um, they're fully aware of it, and I think it's been good for them in that regard, because they're seeing that sometimes young people do die, sadly, and people's family do, because when you're at a certain age, young growing up, kind of feel like everything's fine and it will be forever, which is great. You want children to feel like that, but at the same time, there's nothing wrong with people knowing the reality.
What advice would you give someone who's interested in using and Vinyly's services? Are there some considerations that they should be thinking about before they contact you?
Well, no, not really. I think it's quite, if they're interested in any way, the best thing to do is contact us and just start talking to us, because we can sort of, like I say, that everyone's very, very bespoke. I mean, ultimately, it's a vinyl with ash in it, and there's audio, and you got artwork, but within that, there's so many different things that could be done. That if they've got any interest, just contact us, and then we'll sort of go through stage by stage with them, and they can decide whether that's something that they're interested in or not.
Wonderful. Well, Jason, I know that we're almost out of time. I wanted to thank you for being here and giving us your time. It's really a gift. Thank you. For those who are interested in learning more about and Vinyly, where can they find more information?
Well, our website, which is www.andvinyly, which is spelled ANDVINYLY.com. Very silly name for things like this, because it's impossible. No one can write it down right. But if you look up Ashes in Vinyl, you'll find us.
And I'll
Yeah,
also put it in the
yeah.
description, so there'll be no doubt how to find you. So thank you very much. Folks, as we wrap up today's episode, I hope it's given you a new perspective on how we can keep the memories of our loved ones alive. Hearing a person's voice on a vinyl record, besides from being really cool, can feel like a direct connection to them. And hearing your loved ones' stories with their own voice is a powerful and comforting experience. Thank you for joining us. If you have any questions, please comment below or reach out to me directly. And if you found this conversation to be helpful, please like, share, comment, and subscribe. This is Traci Arieli from Comforting Closure, wishing you peace and comfort in your journey. Until the next time, take care.